Hey everybody, it's Isaiah, and I'm here with Chef B, who's going to tell us about one of our sponsors here. Chef?
Yeah, O&B Puckcast is now brought to you by Summit Public Adjusters. The winter months can be especially hard on our homes, from roof damage and peeling siding to frozen pipes and toilet overflows. Call Summit Public Adjusters before you call your insurance company. Dealing with your insurance company can be stressful and confusing. Let Summit Public Adjusters take the stress out of the claim process by having our guys work for you. Get the most for your money and your repairs. The next time the big snow or the rain leaves you with some home damage, contact us for a free consultation. Summit Public Adjusters are licensed in Pennsylvania and New Jersey. Learn more at summitpublicadjusters.com or call 215-752-0560. Just tell them that the chef sent you.
Yeah, what was that number again, Chef?
215-752-0560.
That's terrific. All right, we're going to carry on with the rest of our show. And we are back. It is the O&B Puckcast. I'm your host, Isaiah. Welcome to episode number 248, brought to you by FlyersNittyGritty.com and Jim South Street. Normally, we would just get into a bunch of numbers about how the Flyers are doing, but hey, let's not ignore the big story and bury the lead. The Flyers traded Joel Farabee, Morgan Frost to the Calgary Flames for Andrei Kuzmenko, Jacob Pelletier, a second-round pick in 2025, and a seventh-rounder in 2028. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about how they've been playing and what the rest of the season looks like. And with the cap increases that we're going to discuss, what it augurs for the offseason and, how deep into the pockets are the Flyers going to go. So let's not hold back any longer. Let's bring in our panel. I'm going to start with the great Dan Silver, who was over in Europe for a couple weeks. Great to have you back. What's your first word of the night?
0, which is the number of goals that the Flyers have scored since I've been back. But it was good to see Morgan Frost score a nice goal for the Flames the other night. So, but it's what, it's going to be fun talking about. We've been kind of a rut talking about the same old stuff. I think now we have a chance to kind of talk about what this trade means for what they can do moving forward, how it maybe again redefines rebuild and what they're looking to do. So I think there's some good things to talk about moving forward with what's going on.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, Chef B, always to my left. What's your opening thought for tonight?
Pull the Band-Aid off. It's a start, and I think we're going to delve more into it. That's all I'll say for now is you got to start somewhere, and you got to start. And the first cut always hurts the most, so we'll see what happens.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's bring in, without any further delay, from The Athletic, covering the Philadelphia Flyers, really experienced reporter, one of our favorites, Kevin Kurz. Kevin, thanks for joining us tonight.
Sure. Yep. Thanks for having me, guys. Appreciate it.
Yeah, really do appreciate having you on. Some of the articles you've had recently have been provocative and particularly honing in on the trade. You had a couple different pieces, one that talked about the nuts and bolts of it, and then you got a little more philosophical looking ahead in your latest piece, and maybe you could share some of your thoughts, condense those for us tonight.
Well, I mean, are we starting with the Frost and Farabee trade?
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, obviously that's a trade that's for the future, and no one's going to say it outright, but to me, when you're trading those two guys, they're both clearly better players than the two that they're getting back from Calgary. Otherwise, Calgary doesn't make that trade and throw in a second-round pick. So, it's a little bit, maybe saying they're punting on the season is a little bit too strong a term, but to me, you look at this roster right now with the tremendous lack of depth down the middle, lack of speed down the middle. You've got some injuries on top of these two guys leaving. The playoffs are now out the window as far as I'm concerned. And I think the organization probably knows that, even if nobody wants to say it yet. But that's also not a terrible thing, right? I mean, a lot of fans have been pushing for this for a long time, lose as many games as possible. And the Flyers have not listened to them. That hasn't been their intent. But at this stage, the way the roster is now, the way the goaltending is, I know Sam Erson's played better lately, but there's still obviously a tremendous lack of depth at the goaltending position as well. They're probably better off getting as high a pick as possible, getting that top 10 pick, maybe a top 5 pick with a little lottery luck. And I think there's a little bit more urgency to get that top pick this year because, as Danny said on Saturday, the cap space that the Farabee deal opens up, along with the rising salary cap, might actually allow them to take on a big salary or sign a free agent a little bit ahead of schedule. So, I think there's a path here where obviously the trade is going to hurt them in the short term, unless they, go out and add somebody big before the trade deadline. I would think that's probably less likely. That sort of big move typically comes in the off season. But if your regular season this year is not going to result in a playoff berth, try to get that top pick. And, because in the future, if the team does improve by the start of next season, whether that's because Briere makes trades or signings or whatever it is, that could be out the window pretty quickly here. Getting a top pick, right? This might be the last year you really have a chance to do that.
Yeah, I mean, it makes a lot of sense because it kind of like stumbled into this, if you want to call it, not maybe a tank or just throwing a season, but they kind of gave the best effort, saw where they were. And it's like, these guys aren't going to work out. These are a confluence of events that kind of fit where they're probably best off, going. So, Dan?
So, yeah, Kevin, I had a question. I see these moves they're making, and obviously we're all kind of been fixated on how is this team going to get a 1C? How are we going to get that first line center? And it seems like, most of the big UFAs sign well ahead of time. I had pipe dreams of Draisaitl or McDavid, but look, these guys are going to re-sign with their same team most likely. It seems like it's been pretty hard for the Flyers trying to put together a trade for a 1C. Not sure if they've actually, how in-depth they've looked at it, but I'm kind of looking at what's going on, and I'm now starting to think that they may be trying to position themselves to make an offer sheet for an RFA, like a Mason McTavish or a Marco Rossi or a Wyatt Johnston, or if they think that Gabe Velarde could, become a center again like he was back in his junior days. I mean, that's kind of like, they're amassing all these draft picks. They can only use their own draft picks for the compensation. And if they signed a guy to a $11 million offer sheet, I think it's like 2 first-round picks and 2 second-round picks. So we'd be giving up our firsts in 2026 and 2027. But I was just curious, like, is that something that you think is a possible option that these guys might look at this summer?
I think everything's going to be on the table. I go back to the very first conversation I had with Keith Jones, and you can go back and look this Q&A up that I had with him. It was, I think, the first story I wrote after I switched beats. And he said something to me that stuck out. And I asked him his philosophy for making trades. And, obviously Danny's the one in the driver's seat when it comes to trades. But he basically said, we're not out there trying to fleece other teams. We're out there. We're going to be trying to make trades that benefit both teams. Because he didn't want to go out there and start, maybe pissing other general managers off. Now, that's if you can make a move that greatly improves your team, I'm sure that supersedes that philosophy. But it makes me think that they might be a little bit more reluctant than some other managers to utilize an offer sheet. Now, this is just me speculating, right? No one's told me that. No one said, no, we're not going to offer sheet anybody. I think it's something that obviously if you're a responsible manager or president of hockey operations or whatever you are, you have to look at every option. So I would tend to think that it's not going to be an offer sheet. They're more going to look at making a trade or maybe I'm not super familiar with who's a free agent this summer. I haven't really looked at it yet, but maybe if there's a player out there, I mean, hell, if Mikko Rantanen, if you have the cap for it, if you have the cap space for it, and his agent calls you on July 1st and says, hey, he would love to be a Flyer. I mean, you have to listen to that, don't you? So I tend to think it's going to be more on the trade market. And I also think, and this is something that I said the other day on Twitter, and again, I might be wrong on this too, but when you look at a guy like Elias Pettersson, I don't think that's a guy that they would go after simply because he's already got his big contract. He's got his 8-year, $11.5 million deal that he's only in the first year of. I would guess, this is again just me speculating, just based on talking to these guys for the last year and a half, how I, try to figure out how they operate. I don't think they would be comfortable bringing in a guy that on that long and that big of a term that they don't really, really know intimately. They haven't seen around the group day in and day out. So I tend to think that when they do target a center, it's going to be either someone with a lesser term and lesser contract, or, someone that they want to bring in. They want to see how he adapts to the room. They want to see him grow as a player. And then if he does, they're the ones that give him the big contract. So if I had to guess, I would say they're going to try and find a player or players that have potential, but haven't quite reached it yet. So I think that's ultimately what we're going to see. Again, this is just me speculating. I don't know that for a fact. They could go out and trade for Elias Pettersson tomorrow, and I'll be completely wrong. But based on knowing these two guys for as long as I have, which is like 20 years now, talking to them about how they're running this team, that's my opinion.
Okay, Chef?
So we had talked about, possibly getting the 5 in the draft. And if you look ahead at the schedule and where they are right now, I mean, honestly speaking, they're 23rd out of 32. Realistically, they have a chance to win 6, maybe 7 more games this season, in my opinion. It's my opinion. And that's,
I don't know.
before the trade. Yeah, that's generous too. So in all honesty, it's not like they can't drop to like 6 or 5 or 7. And then do you think that they have the assets maybe to trade up to 5 or 4? You think anybody at that point? Because if I'm looking at the bottom of the list, the only teams that I think that are worse than them at this point are Chicago, San Jose, and the Ducks. And all of them have games in hands on the Flyers too. 3-4 games at some point.
Yeah, they could certainly drop. We'll see how it goes. You look at the March schedule, there's games every other day for like a month, and you've already got some guys on this team that I think look particularly tired. Now we'll see if the break rejuvenates them. I certainly don't think they're as bad as the Blackhawks or the Sharks, or the Ducks actually been winning some games lately, so I don't know about where they're at, but in terms of trading up, that's really hard to do, and that's something that I think they were reminded of last year when they were trying to trade up from the number 12 spot, and they weren't able to do it. Now they have some more assets going into this year's draft, right? With the 3 first-round picks, the 4 second-round picks. I could see them, maybe trying to trade up in the first round, right? With one of, maybe they have those 2 first-round picks. They give them to a team that's picking, 14th or 15th, and they move up and try to get their guy there. I could see that happening, but trading into the top 5 or even the top 7 or 8, it's really not very common in this league, because no one wants to make a mistake and leave a marquee player on the board that ends up being a superstar and having that come back to haunt them. So I think they realize that. I think they know that if they're going to pick high in the draft, it's going to have to be because it's their own pick.
Yeah. Dan?
If you look right now at the NHL standings, and obviously going by points percentage is the most accurate way of doing it. Right now, the Flyers are actually tied for Anaheim as the 6th worst team in the league. So they're already right now in the top 6, top 7. Seattle is the Flyers have a 481 winning percentage, and Seattle has got 454. They're the team below them. Buffalo's below that. I could easily see a team like Buffalo, play a little bit better the rest of the year. Same with Seattle. So I think it's conceivable. I don't think the Flyers can get to San Jose, Chicago, or Nashville, but it certainly is theoretically possible that they could get to number 4. And now you're in the territory where there are basically 4 or 5 kids at the moment that a lot of the scouts kind of are high on. 2 of them are centers, James Higgins and Michael Misa. And at that point, it's a lot of opinions, right? The first 4 or 5 players in this year's draft, like there's no clear-cut number 1. Matthew Schaefer, the big defenseman from Canada, a lot of people think is the number 1 guy now. But if you're in the top 4, 5, 6, and there's going to be GMs with differing opinions, I think it certainly is possible that you could potentially, let's say the Flyers really like Michael Misa, or they really, really like James Higgins, and whoever gets the number 2 pick likes Misa more. Like maybe you package number 4 or 5 plus 2 of your, second round picks and one of your other first round picks to move up a spot or two, right? But I think the key is going to be that the Flyers are going to have to kind of remain where they are right now, 7th or 6th worst, or go down a little bit and then maybe get some luck with the lottery. So it's not far-fetched that they could actually add one of these, 2 or 3 top centers in the draft this year based on where they are right now. I think that, Chef's, saying they're probably going to only win 6 games. I think that probably they'll win more than 6 games the rest of the way. I mean, their team's not horrendous, but I think there's a good chance they're going to end up bottom 5, bottom 6. So a lot of Flyers fans kind of wanted them to quote unquote tank. And I think they might get a little bit of their wish here the rest of this season. And it makes me think, maybe they can accelerate this rebuild a little bit faster than we thought if they can get one of those top centers and then add someone in free agency or via trade or via offer sheet or something like that.
Yeah. I agree with all that.
Yeah, I think the issue that comes in is like the timeline. Even if you draft a kid, I mean, there's no one in this draft that's projected to be a Celebrini, a Bedard, or McDavid. So the process of getting that player up and running to the point where they're a staple in the lineup and a player you can count on is usually 2 or 3 years. So after you get over the excitement of that, and I hope that happens, I really do, they still are going to have to make a move to get somebody to improve that position in the manner that you spoke about.
Yeah, and I wouldn't even assume that they would target, if they have the 5th overall pick in the draft, I wouldn't even assume that they would target a center. Maybe there's some discussions that Danny's had already with another young center, and maybe they already envision Jet Luchenko playing the number 2 center next season, where you have, maybe you've got a guy you trade for, Jet Luchenko, Noah Cates, Ryan Poehling down the middle next year. So, those are all decisions that we can all kind of guess what they're going to do. But clearly nobody in the organization denies the fact that they need a number 1 center. And that's another thing I talked to Keith about. And I asked him point blank, in today's NHL, in order to win a Stanley Cup, do you need, he thinks there's only 12, 13, 14 true number 1 centers in the NHL, right? The McKinnons, the McDavids, et cetera. You can go down the list. I said, do you need one of those guys, one of those top 12, 13, 14 number 1 centers in order to win a Stanley Cup? And his answer was yes, essentially. So they know that the pressure's on to find one of these guys. And they know it's probably going to be the biggest decision that they've made, or they potentially will make while they're in charge. So it's interesting because I don't remember a time where executives were just so upfront in what they needed, right? Like these guys, Danny even said it on the broadcast last night, right? Maybe we freed up money now because we have to go get a center. So it's a little bit interesting that way, and that they publicly acknowledge that that's a huge hole that's going to have to be filled. And not that it surprises anyone, but I just think it's interesting how often they say it.
Yeah, no, definitely. Chef?
Let's just say that they get lucky, they get in 5 or 6 or whatever, they draft a center. Does it make sense now? Like, because that timeline, like Isaiah just said, is 2 to 3 years. And you go out there to keep the fan base happy. You could technically with some $4 or $5 million additional coming off the books now too, and some other moves in the cap going up. And you have to pay some of these RFAs that we've been, that we have there. So I'm just thinking here, can you offer Rantanen? You'd mentioned him. Can you offer Rantanen maybe a 2-year deal? And that carries you to that number 1 center time or something along those lines?
Well,
or is it more plausible for like the Mason McTavish route that Dan had said? Both these guys were on my list, so I find this very interesting that you each mentioned them. So I like to think I'm on the right path then.
Well, number 1, no, there's no way Mikko Rantanen accepts a 2-year contract anywhere. He's going to sign a 7 or 8 year deal when he hits free agency. I don't think there's any question about that. In terms of the timeline, I mean, I do think there's a path here, and I think they believe there's a path here to challenge for a playoff spot as soon as next season. And the 2 guys he traded, and Danny said this on Saturday, it was about those 2 guys the organization not believing those two guys are going to be long-term fits, but it's also about the guys they have in place. And they really believe in these guys like Tyson Forster, Owen Tippett,
Brink,
Noah Cates, the way he's come around, Bobby Brink, the way he's played lately. Obviously, Michkov is the long-term piece. So, what they're trying to do here, the needle they're trying to thread is have your young players grow together as a group, have them grow together in a strong dressing room with a strong organizational culture, and then add the complementary pieces, or maybe not complementary, add the big pieces that are going to help put you over the top. So, depending on what they do this summer, I mean, if you go out and you get a true top high end center, maybe you sign a winger. Maybe, you obviously hope that your younger guys continue to grow, your Cam Yorks, Tyson Forsters, Owen Tippett's. You hope that they continue to take steps. We'll see. And then we'll see what happens in the goal. And we're getting way ahead of ourselves here, I think. But,
sure.
We'll see what happens with the goaltending too. People like to put these timelines on these. These can change quickly. It's you can say it's going to take 3 years and a few different things happen. And all of a sudden, you can say to yourself, well, actually, maybe this won't take so long. And I'm not saying that's what's going to happen here, but if the right opportunities present themselves, and now is the time to make some moves, this thing could definitely be sped up a little bit.
Yeah, Dan, before I get to you, I just wanted to comment in terms of fans looking ahead. I mean, just as myself, and Dan's 30 plus years, Chef is 40 plus years, and I'm 50 plus years following this team. This last dozen years is a complete anomaly to have a team just basically on a treadmill going nowhere with fits and starts. So that's it's like watching paint dry on the ice. You get into the passion of the game. So it's like, it's like you're waiting for that move or that change in direction where you can grab onto it. And that's why I think the fans are kind of fast forwarding the rest of the season. It's like, I can't stand watching this. I want to fast forward to the summer, let them hand out the cup, and let's get right to the draft and get the trades, because that's how we feel. We want Flyers hockey to really matter the way it used to. That's kind of what's behind that. I mean, I hear what you're saying, because you go through the process and we don't. But that's kind of what's behind that, I think, with most of the fans.
Yeah, I understand. I probably can't fully appreciate the frustration because I worked for the team until 2010, and then I moved to California in 2011. So, I would always follow from afar. But I probably can't appreciate the frustration that fans have felt year over year with very few moments to cheer them on. But especially, I don't think I appreciated how much they were off the local sports radar until I really got back here. Obviously It's Eagles #1. Now the Phillies are good. Sixers, I know, stink this year, but I know they've been pretty good for a little while now. So, and I see it with friends that have kids. My friends have kids that are 8, 9, 10. Or I have nieces and nephews that, they all love the Eagles and the Phillies, but they've never been to a hockey game. So, and as someone who I did grow up a fan, obviously that's how you end up getting into this business. It would be great to see this hockey team again make an impact on the local sports scene, because right now they are kind of off the radar.
Yeah, for sure. Dan?
So yeah, I've 2 questions. The first one you kind of led me into is about the goaltending, and you've written a lot of, I would say, strong pointed articles recently. And the article about Alexei Kolosov, I could almost kind of and I might be wrong, but sort of read through the article. It was sort of imbued with your sort of, I don't know if disdain is the right word, but that's what I'm going to go with, about the situation of how this young goaltender has sort of forced his way onto the roster. And I just kind of wanted to get your, current thoughts on how they've handled him, and also the goaltending situation moving forward, and just how you see it.
Yeah, the Kolosov thing, I don't understand at all. It doesn't make any sense. my theory is maybe they're trying to turn him into some sort of a tradable asset, but it doesn't make any sense. I mean, he wants it. Let me back up. It made sense at one point when they saw Ivan Fedotov in training camp, and they probably realized at that point he wasn't ready for the NHL. And then when he struggles through those first 3 games, I mean, he's the worst goalie I've ever seen in my life. This guy, they're throwing him out there for 3 games. He was the worst goalie I've ever seen in my life until I saw Kolosov. So I understood why they wanted to give Kolosov a chance, because they were probably really worried that Fedotov was not going to be able to handle the number 2 workload and would have to get some time in the minors. But, you know, it was also, it's been mishandled by everyone. It's been mishandled by Danny, because nobody wants 3 goalies on the roster. Tell me what kind of message that's sending to your other players on the Phantoms when the guy says, I don't want to live in Lehigh Valley. I have to play on the NHL roster, you know, or else I'm going to go home to the KHL. So that doesn't make any sense. John Tortorella mishandled it, or not just Torts, but maybe Kim Dillaball and everybody else in the organization mishandled it when they named Kolosov the number 2. Whereas Fedotov actually did get his game together, right? And he's the guy making $3.2 million or whatever it is through this year and next. Why was the priority not to get Fedotov going, right? So you make Kolosov the number 2. He can't stop a beach ball. And then by the time coming out of the Christmas break, it was just evident that he was letting in goals left and right. And they knew from day one that he wasn't ready for the NHL. And a month later, all of a sudden, he's the number 2. Ahead of the guy that you're paying $3.3 million, who actually, in hindsight now, is playing better. You know, I don't know if he's going to be around next year, but he's at least playing better, and he's won some games, and he's given you some serviceable minutes. And now Kolosov's back, which doesn't make any sense. You know, I know that's the AHL All-Star break. Are you telling me this kid is so fragile that he can't spend a week in Lehigh Valley until the Phantoms come back? Why is he? If you want him working on his game, have him stay back in Voorhees and work with somebody there. The whole thing is a bunch of nonsense. It's just reached farcical levels as far as I'm concerned. So we'll see what the end game is. You know, if they end up dealing him for a 3rd round pick in next year's draft, well, all right, then I guess maybe it'll be worth it. But I can't imagine anybody's looking at this kid right now thinking, oh, Alexei Kolosov's an interesting prospect. I'm going to go give up an asset for this guy, when he's got an .870 save percentage and he wants to dictate to the organization how he should be developed. It makes 0 sense. So I like a lot what Danny and Keith Jones have done to this point. This one, I got nothing. It's nonsense.
It kind of smacks of some kind of sensitivity with the history of maybe Bobrovsky or even Gauthier to some degree. That's all I could think of.
But you have 2 goalies in the pipeline, 2 good prospects in the pipeline. You have Carson Bjarnason, who was the top-ranked North American goalie that they traded up to get, and you've got Igor Zavragin, who is tearing up the KHL. What are we doing? What are we doing?
I think it's a timeline. I think they need a 2 or 3 year bridge before those guys are really ready to be full-time NHLers, or at least complements to Ursun. If Ursun is still here,
which is why instead of bringing over Fedotov and bringing over Kolosov, they should have signed a veteran in the offseason, right?
Oh yeah,
these guys, and these guys, you never know how they're going to be, right? Anthony Stolarz is tearing it up. He could have gone it's just as likely he would have not been very good this year, right? You never know with these goalies, but that to me was the much more logical play. Was it's somebody's job in the organization to identify goalies that can stop the puck. So they couldn't identify that Fedotov wouldn't be able to stop the puck at the NHL level. That's an organizational error. And then this Kolosov mess is on everyone.
Yeah. Do you think that? I mean, the Fedotov thing, it seemed like, and there were some rumblings about this, that bringing him over and paying him that much was sort of somehow intertwined with being able to get Michkov over. I think they have the same agent. Like, do you buy that there could be something with that?
Well, okay. I've gotten this question a couple of times. The Flyers didn't learn that Michkov was going to be an option to come over this season until the draft combine at Buffalo, which is mid-June, early June, I think. So Fedotov had already been paid by that point. And I don't think there's there's nothing, you can't draw a line from Fedotov's contract to Michkov all of a sudden coming over. So, was it a show of good faith? I mean, I don't know, maybe, but it's, when they signed Fedotov to that 2-year extension, they still didn't know Michkov had any possibility of coming over early. So that's what I know. Yeah.
Okay.
And the next question I had was about Michkov. So you're around the team all the time, Chef, me and Isaiah, you guys probably watch most of the games. I try and watch as many as I can. Kevin, you're basically seeing every game. You're seeing what's going on behind the scenes. How do you think, there's been a lot of sort of chatter recently about his minutes and his declining minutes. He's been getting less than 10 minutes in some games. Some people think, okay, yeah, he looks tired. Then other people look to the fact that he's still creating more scoring chances than anyone on the team when you look at the advanced metrics. Like, what do you see in terms of how they're handling Michkov? Do you think he's tired? Like, what are your thoughts on it?
Well, first I would say I don't think there's any concern about his attitude whatsoever. We see him go on. That game where his minutes were reduced, he was out on the ice like 20 minutes before anybody else was. We see him come into the dressing room now. He's starting to learn English. He's saying hello to people. I mean, he's coming out of his shell a little bit. You see guys joking with him, when they're all sitting in their stalls. I don't think there's any concern about his attitude at all. As far as him as Tortorella, like I think these guys, they're like long lost relatives. I mean, you can almost we see Tortorella, how fired up he gets. Michkov gets just as fired up. I mean, in practice, he'll go on a breakaway in practice and he'll miss the net or hit the post and he'll get immediately pissed off and this look on his face. I mean, this guy is competitive as hell. And I think that's what Tortorella loves about him. Advanced metrics for Michkov, I wouldn't even waste my time. They're not worth the paper they're printed on as far as I'm concerned. Yes, he's creating offense. We know, we can all see that with our 2 eyes, and he's got a special set of skills in the offensive zone, whether it's his vision, his shot, his playmaking. I mean, this guy has it. But when you're blowing the zone and it's resulting in a goal the other way, that doesn't show up on any sort of advanced metrics. When you make a mistake that big, there's going to be consequences, and it's not just for him; it's for everybody on the team, right? You can't compare Michkov to Travis Konechny. Well, Travis Konechny made a mistake, so why don't they bench him for the third period? Well, Travis Konechny's been in the league for how many years, and there's their team's best player. So don't that. I hate it when the people compare the two. This is a rookie who's played less than 50 career, or what is he at? 50 career NHL games. Who the coach is trying to make sure learns he has to play a certain way in order to not hurt the team. So, we haven't seen it blow up yet. I mean, there was a little conversation on the bench the other day, right? We all saw that. He was having the same conversations with Bobby Brink a year ago, right? How many times do we see Torts yelling and screaming at Bobby Brink on the bench? Well, Bobby Brink turned out pretty good, actually, right? I'd like to see him finish a little bit more, but he's also not a guy who has the same sort of skills as a Michkov does. So, I think it's gone fine so far. They're having conversations behind closed doors, right? This is something Torts has said over and over again is they're having meetings once a week, and Torts doesn't meet typically with players once a week, but he's meeting with Michkov through Slava Kuznetsov, the translator, frequently. So there's a lot of dialogue going on behind closed doors that we don't see. All I can say is that throughout the whole process, I don't think there's ever been any worry about Michkov's work ethic, his commitment to get better, his attitude. I think that's all been positive so far. So that if I'm a Flyers fan, would give me hope for the future.
Yeah.
So we had mentioned Kolosov, and do you think that there's a chance that maybe he can be part of another salary dump kind of thing, maybe to a team that we know how much the cap's going up? There's going to be a couple teams in by my math that are going to might have a hard time reaching the floor, like maybe Utah or something.
Do you mean Fedotov?
What's that?
Do you mean Fedotov? Because he's the
Uh,
one making $3.5 million or
Yeah, Kolosov doesn't make much money.
Yeah, Kolosov doesn't
Yeah,
make
Yeah.
money.
I know, but as a throw-in or something, or either
Yeah,
one.
I
of
mean,
them,
I've
actually.
wondered if they were trying to turn him as some sort of asset. I mean, in terms of Kolosov, if I would think after the Four Nations break or when the Four Nations break hits, they'll send him back to the Phantoms, let him play there. Next season, certainly I wouldn't make him the number 2 next season based on what we've seen so far. I would say he's got to, if he wants to play in the NHL, you've got to come back next year to the Phantoms and compete with Bjarnason, who's going to be turning pro. And if you don't want to do that, see you later.
Yeah, in a normal development situation, those two would share the net.
Yep. That's what they wanted them. That's what he wanted. He wanted originally they wanted Kolosov to share the net with, Cal Peterson or they brought in that McAniemi who I know has been hurt. Yeah. They wanted him to play with the Phantoms and learn the North American game. Well, he hasn't done that. And clearly it's hurt him.
Yeah. I mean, I've listened to Steve Allicat from Kurz Analytics. He was the King Henry's backup for years. And he talks about, how many games goalies have in the NHL to be successful. And the Flyers have to have a little bit more patience. And that's why I talk about like a 2 or 3 year process. And then they have to get, in fact, I would say overall, one of the things that Breer has to work on is getting to that cycle like we saw with Washington. How are the Capitals? They might be having a fluke year, but for years, Hershey is always a really good team. And the guys grow together and they develop the culture down there. They bring up, and there's a uniformity about it,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, obviously it's going to be an ongoing process for the team to restock their system, right? And the Phantoms aren't going to get probably all that much better until that happens. Now, Bjarnason will be a real interesting name when he turns pro next season, right? I mean, he's going to be probably the number 1 there with the Phantoms, or at least he'll get 50% of the time. And we know how goaltending goes around here. I mean, he's a good prospect, so he's going to be a guy to keep an eye on next year. Oliver Bonk will probably be down there, right? So there'll be some guys down there with the Phantoms next year that should make that team a little bit better, I would think.
Yeah, definitely. Last one from me, Kev. I just wanted to ask about John Tortorella. He's going into a lame duck season next year, and there was talk that eventually he would move into the front office. Vis-a-vis attracting players, is it overblown that John Tortorella could be a negative in that regard? And how has all that come together as the Flyers are looking to maybe get off that treadmill next year, like we talked about in the beginning of the show, in terms of how they manage Tortorella? Or is it just John's choice and that's the way it's going to be? Or what do you think is going to play out?
I mean, there have been no indications to me that John Tortorella is going anywhere. And he's even indicated a few times, I can't specifically remember what he said, but I think he wants to keep coaching this team past this season. So if that's the case and the Flyers want to keep him around, I would think they'd at least give him a 1 year extension, right? I mean, you never want to have that sort of hanging over your head, especially with a guy like Tortorella. I mean, if he's a lame duck coach and the team struggles out of the gate next year, everyone's going to be talking about it. So, we'll see. I don't know. I mean, if he has a change of heart at the end of this season and wants to move upstairs, I think that's maybe a discussion they would have. But, I think he still likes coaching this team. I still think he wants to help see it through a little bit longer behind the bench. But we'll see where things stand. We'll see how the rest of this season goes, first of all, and then that's one of those things that usually they're not giving away any hints until the season ends, right? So
right.
But everything I can tell is that he wants to keep coaching.
You got it, Dan. You got a last one for Kevin before we let him go?
Yeah. So, and I know that I want to bring this up. I know that Twitter/X is tough because of word constraints. And you had a tweet that got a lot of attention. I mean, I even said something about it because I had a thought about it, was the Elias Pettersson thing, when a lot of Flyers fans were kind of talking about him. And I think you had a tweet to the effect of something about how, you didn't think he might be an option because you didn't know if the Flyers kind of knew him. And
right.
my thought on that was, well, Rick Tockett's the coach there. He's been with the Flyers for a long period of time, and they could just ask him. But I wanted to, because again, a lot of times it's hard to convey things on X Twitter. So I wanted to see if you maybe go into more of like kind of like what you were getting at there and sort of like more meat on that.
I think guys like Keith Jones and Danny Briere, before they commit to players for these big deals, they want to see how they adapt to the room. They want to see what their habits are on a day-to-day basis. And, I'm sure Jonesy talks to Rick Tocchet all the time, right? And there's ways to get information on guys. But, that's why I said earlier, I think if they do target a center, it's not going to be someone that's already signed to an 8-year deal that's the 5th highest paid player in the league, that quite frankly, there's some concerns about right now, because why did he have that rift with JT Miller? Nobody really knows right now. Everyone wants to blame JT Miller. Well, I think JT Miller is a lot more like Torts than Elias Pettersson is, just from my outside view. I think if the Flyers are going to commit to a guy for that long and for that much term, it's going to be someone that they really know is a fit. Can anybody right now say that Elias Pettersson would 100% be a great fit for this team as their number one center moving forward? You make that trade, you're making him the centerpiece of your rebuild, full stop. Are you going to make the centerpiece of your rebuild someone that you don't quite know through and through? So that's what I was getting at. Maybe I'm wrong. If they trade for Elias Pettersson tomorrow, then I'll have been wrong. But I think they want to make sure that they're committing to the right people. They're going to be super careful about it. They've said that. They want to be very patient to make sure they're getting the right guy. I don't think they would be fully convinced that Elias Pettersson is the right guy without actually seeing the way he conducts himself and handles himself in a dressing room and around his teammates and on the ice in certain situations, off the ice in certain situations, that they would be comfortable making a deal like that.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. I mean, I think it's going to be a fine line to walk when you're trying to get a 1C to try and figure out how can you get someone, especially if you're looking at free agency or a guy like Pettersson making a lot of money. If you're going to throw a lot of money at someone, it's probably going to be someone who's not already in the locker room. So it's like, how do you get that 1C that you're comfortable with? And I get that there's some guys that obviously probably look, a McDavid or a Draisaitl, it's like we know what kind of player these guys are, right? But like with Pettersson, I think you're right that there's enough question marks about him that you probably want to know more. But it's going to be interesting to see what they try and do to get this 1C based on what your perceptions are, what they kind of want that guy to be and what they want to know about him.
Yeah, and again, that's just my opinion. I think what they're probably going to try and do is target someone whose stock might be a little bit low, that isn't signed to a huge deal yet, that they believe through scouting him and learning about him, obviously, that's a guy they'll target. So that's just what I think is going to happen. That's not based on any sort of inside knowledge. It's just based on how I think Keith and Danny operate. From talking to them as much as I do. So, we'll see. Obviously, if Connor McDavid is a free agent, I mean, all bets are off the table at that point. I mean, let's be real. But, that tweet was specific to Pettersson, and I probably didn't phrase it the right way. And, then I see people saying, well, they're never going to trade. How are they going to trade for anybody? And that's not what I was saying. It was more about him. I don't think they would be comfortable making that deal for a guy that has that much money for 7 more years left on his contract.
Yeah, one final comment. I mean, back in the day, the Flyers traded for Darryl Sittler. They knew that player by competing against him, and everybody knew Darryl. He was a great guy and all that. Conversely, recently, the Bruins went out and traded for Elias Lindholm, and that is not working out very well. He's had an up and down career. He's not as talented as Pettersson, so the ceiling was never as high, but he's a two-way center who they were hoping that he could be a number one guy. And clearly he doesn't seem to be that player. And I think that's the situation the Flyers want to avoid. Comparable?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, Elias Pettersson has in the last calendar year, I think he has 61 points in 84 games or something like that. I mean, not even a point per game. And I know he's reached previous heights, but that's a full calendar year. That's not a small sample size anymore. So we'll see. It's probably a moot point anyway, because Vancouver wants to kind of let him, I guess, see, based on the reports I've read, Vancouver wants to see if he responds well to JT Miller not being there anymore. But if he doesn't respond well to JT Miller, if he responds well, they're going to keep him. If he doesn't respond well, who the hell's going to want to trade for him?
That's your point. And if he doesn't respond well, your point is well taken.
Yeah.
It's kind of, it's insulated. Your viewpoint is kind of insulated by those facts. But anyway, really appreciate you coming on, Kev. Why don't you tell the people or where they can find your work and on social media?
I'm at The Athletic, still part of the New York Times, and Twitter is KKurs NHL.
And you're also on Blue Sky as well.
Yeah, I don't know what my handle is on that.
I think it's Kevin
It might just
Kurz,
be my name. It might just be my full
NHL,
name. Yeah.
bsky.social.
Sounds right. That sounds right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Kevin, thanks for coming on. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
Kevin, this was great.
Have a
All
good
right.
one.
We'll
Take care.
hope to have you on again soon. Thanks.
You got it. All right.
Right.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Okay. So, Kevin is not shy and not short of opinions. He likes to take a stand, and certainly I can appreciate that.
I thought that was great. I mean, he took a lot of heat on that Elias Pettersson tweet, so I wanted to ask him about that, and I kind of know what he's saying. I have heard from some of my people that are around the Flyers that they have talked to Rick Tocchet about Pettersson, and that he has some questions about him. Tocchet does. So I'm guessing the Flyers have done some due diligence there.
Oh, I don't doubt that at all. I mean, with regard to questions talking about like his dedication or how he handles the spotlight, stuff like that.
Yeah, stuff like that. And if he thinks that he could be a 1C on a championship type of team.
Yeah. Well, don't forget, one of the benefits of having, your general manager like Jonesy around is this, or director of operations. Well, he's been all over this league, man. He knows, he's got contacts everywhere. And in this business, it's about backdoor phone calls going, hey, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? And it's really, I think in the long run, it's going to really prove its fruit, that it's a very fruitful choice to have him there, because he knows all these people.
I hope so. I hope he's got the inside on a lot of guys, because Kevin talked about the center who may be a little bit of a downslope, and just needs a change of scenery, a lot like Calgary is hoping with Farabee and Frost. But before we go further with this, I just want to remind people about Jim South Street, 400 South Street in Philadelphia. 40 years of the best cheesesteaks, hoagies, and fries in the grandest Philadelphia tradition. You want one. And if you live down there, all you need is Uber Eats, DoorDash. If you actually can't get out the door, check them out. If you are down there, Jim South Street, 400 South Street in Philadelphia, PA. Tell them the O&B Puckcast and FlyersNittyGritty.com sent you. So the Flyers, what are the Flyers? The Flyers are 23, 25, and 6 for 52 points. Since our last show, they went 1-3. As we record, there are 6 teams ahead of them in the Eastern Conference wild card race with 28 games remaining. Overall, in the last 10 games, they're 4-5-1. And barring a major acquisition, I said this earlier, they're just kind of playing out the string, including the last 3 games, a shutout streak. And according to Bill Meltzer, the Flyers were shut out 3 straight games in 2002 in the Eastern Conference quarterfinals versus Ottawa. But this never happened during the regular season. So the Flyers have an ignominious distinction for this year with 3 shutouts in a row. And of course, what happens. Next game they play, they'll score 7 when they play Utah.
We'll see about that.
Yeah, they're in Utah. And this is actually the last week before the incredible, compelling, captivating Four Nations tournament is upon us. And of course, we have a trade deadline on Friday, March the 7th. And Chef, it seems like the trade deadline, like Gary Lawless, who's with the the Vegas Golden Knights, mentioned is coming in 2 tranches. The first tranche we've seen with Rantanen, the Frost Farabee trade, and then Marcus Pettersson goes to Vancouver, and a bunch of other deals, including Granlund goes to Dallas. So, and then of course we have March the 7th, because there's only 5 or 6 games for most teams when the teams come back after the tournament, and then you have the trade deadline.
Well, it's going to all depend on what happens at the Four Nations too, isn't it? Because, look, you got these guys, they want to wear their country on their sleeve, right? And any injuries during this is really going to affect the stretch down the end here. I mean, I've heard a couple people, podcasts and other people out there, and guys that cover throughout the whole league would love to see maybe not non-season tournaments like this, not in-season tournaments. Yeah, I don't know if that's ever going to be a reality. I don't know how many people are going to get excited about hockey in July and August, but I could see that the trade deadline getting a little bit spicy because look, these are all very good players that are playing in Four Nations, and they're very valuable to their individual teams. And I can see if 1 or 2 of them go down, it's gonna affect their team directly right during the playoff stretch.
Yeah, I could see that. So we didn't really get into the trade too much. We talked about the aftermath of the trade. Morgan Frost, what can we say about this player? We knew he had no future here. And when I say new, I say that in air quotes. I mean, you saw it, right? And with Farabee, Dan, it was like trying to get blood from a stone. And it's such a shame because of the two. I mean, look, both guys are great kids. Nobody's questioning them on or off the ice in terms of how they comport themselves. It just wasn't working. Farabee to me is a mystery. I know you like that player coming out back in the day because I was listening to you back in your Phillies Flyer days. You wrote some really great stuff on him, and it just after the 22 goals and so at the end of last year and the calendar year, it's just been total frustration.
I love Frost and Farabee. I mean, they were 2 of my favorite prospects during that time period, and that was the time period I was really writing a lot about prospects. It's kind of sad to see them both go. It's obviously the 2 guys that we got in the Braden Shen trade. And it's Frost scored a really nice goal in his first game, or it was maybe his second game with Calgary.
The second game, yeah, I saw that.
I still think both of those guys could become pretty good NHL players. For whatever reason, and I think Frost had Frost got enough ice time, right?
Yeah.
He clearly had enough ice time. He had enough power play opportunities. But it feels to me like John Tortorella never really liked him as a player. I don't think that Morgan Frost was ever going to get in John Tortorella's good graces. And I think that no matter how much ice time he had, I think that whole thing sort of colored the way that Frost played here. And I will not be surprised if Frost becomes a really good NHL scorer in a different environment where he's away from John Tortorella. It will not surprise me. He needs to be more aggressive. He needs to show a little bit more ambition, for lack of a better word. And Farabee's a really good hockey player. And I don't know what happened after February of last year. I mean, he just kind of disappeared in terms of scoring. But I really like the hockey player. And I think both of those guys, I think that they both could turn their careers around in Calgary. I still question some of the decisions that the Flyers have made. I'm not sure that Owen Tippett necessarily is going to be a better NHL player than Joel Farabee for the next 5 years. It's going to be interesting to watch. But Tippett was one of Torts' guys. They signed him to the big contract. So, Farabee and Frost are the guys that they decided to trade. I'm going to have fun watching them in Calgary. I'm a little bit annoyed because I got the Farabee jersey last year, so I now no longer have a jersey of anyone that's currently on the team. I guess I'm going to have to get a Michkov jersey or something like that. But yeah, I think that this trade is exciting because it allows us to think more about what they may be planning in the future. And I know that Kevin said that he he doubts a little bit that they might offer sheet someone because they don't want to kind of like cause any stirs with other GMs. I think that they might go after somebody with a big offer sheet, but we'll see. So it's kind of exciting to think about. I know, Chef, you've been talking about Mikko Rantanen, and Kevin mentioned him. Can he play center though? Isn't he just a wing?
I've heard. Now, I know you're asking Chef, but I just want to interject that I have heard that he wants the opportunity to play center. I don't know, Chef, if you had heard the same thing.
Yeah. I mean, I had gone back and forth. Ironically speaking, I went, okay, when I was playing around with numbers, and I was a numbers chef when I was a chef, and I'm still a numbers chef. So when I was looking at the cap hit and all that, I originally thought it was going to be like the 93 million or 92 million, around that range. And then I saw the 95.5, and I was like, ooh, well, that's a little extra room. And that's why I threw Rantanen in there into the mix of what I was thinking about. But initially speaking, I had Mason McTavish on my radar, just like you did, Dan.
Yeah, you'll never get him. You'll never get him. You know why?
Well, I mean,
Anaheim,
like that's
now Anaheim has so much cap space that in with
they have so many centers too, right, Dan?
I mean, you could trade him. You could trade for him.
Trade for him.
Yeah.
Look, all of these teams have a decent amount of cap space. The teams we're talking about going after are at offer sheets. But you had the Anaheim GM recently come out and say that he, referred to McTavish as like a third line player. Like, now I'm sure Pat Beek doesn't think that, but if you offer these guys enough money, quite honestly, the guy who's almost the most intriguing to me, if you could move him back to center, is Gabe Vilardi. Because Gabe Vilardi's averaging almost a point a game this year. I know he's playing right wing, but he's a big, strong kid who was a very good center the same year. I think it was the same year we took Nolan Patrick, and he went maybe like 9th or 10th. He had some back issues.
Back surgery.
Vilardi, if he could become a center again, I think he's a guy you might be able to pry away with an offer sheet. Again, he's been playing right wing, so that's a question mark. But as a big, strong 1C to go with Mitch Cobb, that's a guy who I think is a Flyers type of player, is Gabe Vilardi. So that's a guy that I would keep my eye on, if I was a Flyers fan.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about Vilardi is he just hasn't been at center. He doesn't have really good foot speed in every other way. He's hockey smart. He's kind of like, in a lot of ways,
Couturier?
He's almost a little like Couturier, except he hasn't played center. He's a really stout. He's a big guy. So I think he's like 6'3" or something. And, he's put together, and he's really coming on now. Winnipeg. Does he want to leave Winnipeg? Yeah, probably. But does he want to play for a winning team? He's gonna have some choices. I think if they think he could play center, and that's a big if. Yeah, I'd be down with it. You can always get some small, fast guys or whatever. But they need a center, and Vilardi, if he's a point a game player, that would definitely fit the bill. That's for sure.
Yeah, I know. I mean, the other guys, Wyatt Johnston. I haven't heard him mentioned as much from some people around the Flyers. He's a logical guy to go for. I don't know if Dallas would I think that Dallas would likely match on him. McTavish, like Isaiah, like you said, Anaheim has so much cap space that I think you'd have to blow it out of the water with an offer. I know, Chef, what you're saying about trading for him, but it's the same thing. Like, if they're going to match a huge offer for him, why would they trade him? Like, you know what I mean? So I would almost, if you want to get McTavish, I would almost rather try and go after him with the offer sheet, because Anaheim has less control over that than they do with a trade. They have to agree to a trade, and I'm not sure, what they would want from us. Matthew Nyes is a guy I've heard named around Flyers circles. He's a winger, but he's very talented. I know that the Flyers are kind of interested in him a little bit.
They need left wing. So Matthew Nye is the left winger.
Yeah, he's a left winger.
Yeah,
which is a little more interesting. And then you've got Marco Rossi, who had been mentioned in connection with the Flyers earlier this year. He's like playing 1C, 2C for the Wild now. I'm not sure you would be able to pry him away, and he's a little on the smaller side in terms of what the Flyers might envision for their 1C. So, look, like we talked about, there's really no perfect fits out there. So it's going to be interesting to see what they come up with.
Yeah, I wasn't saying, either way for McTavish. I would just say if there's a chance to get McTavish, if you that you would just try to go for it, because that's probably, of everybody we mentioned out there, that's probably the best option that they're going to have to get anybody at center that can jump in right away around the 1-2C area. So, and then there's also a lot of, I think they'll at least have some people to look at on wing anyway, especially left wing going forward. So there'll be options,
I hope so. There's a lot.
What about Ehlers? Nikolai Ehlers?
Ehlers.
Ehlers?
Yeah, Ehlers. Really, really good two-way player. I mean, the analytics people really like him. He's a solid
free
player.
agent, so I mean,
yeah,
if you could,
he's older.
You might overpay with 28.
He's a 2015 draft, or was he 28? Something
28,
like that.
Yeah.
Maybe he doesn't solve their problem though, because I think they're really going to prioritize getting a center in here that stabilizes that position. And I'm really concerned. Something I should have asked Kevin. I'm not going to assume Jet Lachenko is ready to come in and be a full-time NHL player. I mean, he didn't belong on the team when they had him here, but they were just keeping him out of need. And he's not exactly having a great draft plus 1 year, not knocking it out of the park. It's not saying he's bad, but it looks like he needs more development, especially to working on his offensive game. And I think it was Anthony Mingione I was talking about. I have some concerns about that myself.
Now, I do have a question I wanted to ask Dan. Who, like, realistically speaking, you probably have Bonk, Luchenko. Is Barkey going to be a Phantom next year too, or is he?
Barkey's the drafted the same year as Bonk, so he would be a Phantom next year. There will be some fun guys to look forward to. The Flyers prospect pool is not spectacular. I think the Athletic had it ranked like 17th in their most recent one, but that should change this year. I mean, I think they are going to end up in that sort of like 5 to 7 range, which means, you have to get lucky, but you don't have to get that lucky to move up into the top 2. So I think that prospect pool is going to get a lot better. Now we have 3 first-round picks and 4 second-round picks. I'm sure they will be trying to use some of those picks to move up higher, would be my guess. Especially if they end up around 6 or 7 and they've got a guy at like 3 or 4 they really want. I could see them offering, number 7 and then their other 2 first-round picks to move up a few spots. So
what? And there's one more. Was it Cole Knuble? Didn't he get some? Isn't there was some like nice talk about him?
Him and Bump are both up for the Hobie Baker Award.
That's it. Yeah. Well, that's a surprise.
That's a nice talk.
Yeah, it's a healthy surprise. So I always liked his dad. So he's one of those players that did that. So it's nice to see something from him. Maybe you can get a surprise out of him. Who knows? Maybe not necessarily first, second line guy. Maybe a third or fourth line guy, but it's better than having him in the system than going out and overpaying for him. So you got to have third and fourth liners too. So
sure. And Brett Flair said that Alex Bump is going to be an NHL player. So expect him at some point to make the team. And if not, maybe Flair will be on the unemployment line. Do we want to talk about Andrei Kuzmenko or Jacob Pelletier?
Okay, let's do it.
Any comments about?
Well, Pelletier is a guy that I hear people just rave about his locker room makeup. He was obviously a first-round pick, and I saw an interview on NHL Network it was either NHL Network or Sportsnet with the guy who used to be his coach in the Canadian juniors. And he just said he's like literally the best leader that he'd ever had on his team. He was the captain for his team. He's infectious. He's enthusiastic. I think the Flyers are intrigued with maybe what Pelletier could bring to the table. And he still has some sort of like potential that might be left to be unlocked, sort of like a Frost or a Farabee. So I think they get that back. And then Kuzmenko's interesting. They were saying that they were sort of wanted to get a look at him before free agency because, he played with Michkov in Sochi a few years ago, played on his line. So I think they want to kind of see what Kuzmenko can bring. I think most Flyers fans are assuming that because this was sort of a cap dump with Farabee, that you're not going to re-sign Kuzmenko. He's going to be an unrestricted free agent because he'll be making as much as Farabee was making, most likely. But if he comes in, let's say he comes in, he looks great playing on a line with Michkov. He supercharges the power play. Then you have to look at signing him, I think. So he's a guy that a lot of people don't think is going to mesh very well with Torts because he's got a reputation as not being a very good defensive player, doesn't hustle a whole lot. So there could be some problems there. But I think the Flyers were intrigued with him. Calgary just wanted him off their books. I think that the Flyers are going to be intrigued to kind of get a look at him. And I am too, to see how he looks with Michkov.
Yeah, I was listening just getting back to Peltier. He was a 26 overall pick in the first round by Calgary in 2019. And I was listening to the Flames Nation reporter on Hot Stove on SiriusXM. And he said they really like Pelletier for a lot of reasons you were talking about. The one qualm they have with him is that he's this fiery, smaller guy, 5'9", and he needs a lot of physicality to engage, to be at his most effective. And unfortunately, in the process of that, he gets hurt a lot. And they doubt over the course of time whether he'll be able to stay in the lineup enough to have the impact that his promise, would seem to indicate. So that's the one red flag on him. And Kuzmenko, he had 39 goals one year. And then he got traded because supposedly a lazy bastard. If you listen to an interview with Tocchet talking about Kuzmenko and like more or less just saying that he's not doing what we need him to do. And he ended up getting a trade basically like they're done with him. They need to clear cap. My concern is he'll come here, he'll do something with Michkov, and he'll have some chemistry on the power play, and the Flyers will feel, well, he's going to help our power play. And we're so desperate, 3 years in a row last, and we're vying for 4 years in a row. And I think they'll be very cautious about the kind of deal he gets. To me, he seems like a guy, and I could be totally wrong, Kuzmenko seems like a guy who's going to go back to Europe or to KHL at some point. And maybe they can get a few power play goals for the rest of the season, but we'll have to see.
Do you think he gets all right? Maybe. Well, all right. Let's play devil's advocate. He does well. He gets some good goals. He got great chemistry with Michkov. Blah blah blah. Kind of wakes up the sleeping dragon that is Michkov. And you think there's any chance they give him a show me? All right, let me see what you can do over a whole season. Do you think there's a chance of that? Maybe a midway somewhere money. What was he making? Like $5 million, right? Around the same as Farabee, correct? So
very similar. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
5.5 or something. Yeah.
5.5. I think he was making more than Farabee. So you think retrospective? I mean, do you think you could sit there and go, all right, well, we'll give you a 3.8 or something, or 4 or whatever, and you show me, and we'll sign you. You can get a 2 or 3 year deal out of them. Do you think that's even on their radar right now? Because the player is what, older? What is he? He's 28 too, right?
I think 29.
29.
But yeah,
So so then
I know
you brought it up. That's why I'm saying it. I initially thought it was just a dump, but now that you say that with all the connections, I thought, but do you want to hang?
29? He's 29 tomorrow.
No, okay, so he's still 28. So I was right. All right, I'm right by one day.
One day,
but I'm still right. So I'll take it. So I'd say it doesn't happen often.
He would have to light up their power play to such an extent. Otherwise, he could be the second coming of Pavel Brendel, or more modern. Most Flyer fans of a certain age know he is the laziest bastard to ever play in the O&B, and maybe more like the Pierre-Luc Dubois. So he's the kind of guy who can flash and say, wow, this guy can really shoot. He's really an asset offensively, but the rest of the game, it's just it ain't working.
Yeah.
And it doesn't seem like a Tortorella guy. So to me, he was necessary to make the deal happen. The main thing is they had to get Farabee off the books, and according to our buddy Anthony DeMarco, that was really what drove the trade. As soon as someone was willing to take Farabee without retaining salary, the Flyers pounced on it. That was really the driving force behind the deal.
I love him too. I love the player too, just like Dan. Hell, I had him on my board, and I said when they drafted, I said, "Oh, the Flyers are going to take Farabee." Everybody looked at me like I was an idiot. I did it. It was live in the kitchen. We were doing it. We had it all at the restaurant where I was working at the time, and I put it up on the board. They're going to take Farabee. Everybody laughed at me. And then they looked at me like I knew something. But no, it's just that was there to me at that time. He seemed like what a Flyer player should be, and he was for a while. He was a prototypical Flyer, and it just fell off. It's a shame. I wish him the best.
If you followed the great Dan Silver at the time, that was the pick that Dan, I think, recommended.
Yep.
And it just didn't work out. Now, this year, if you follow The Athletic and they have their cards and they use analytics, and I guess they come up with the RAPM, which is a regularized adjusted plus minus using all, Corsi and expected goal model. He was performing at like a $2 million, at a $3 million level, making $5 million.
Yeah.
So he was underperforming by $2 million. So roughly, it was on 1.9 actually. So that's just wasn't working. But Farabee's the guy who's going to, in my opinion, anyway, if there's anybody who's going to make that trade look bad, it's more likely to be Farabee than Frost. But we'll see. We'll see. So I think that's what we got for you tonight. The Flyers play tomorrow night as we speak in Utah, a very intriguing team. I sure wish we could have won the lottery or finished higher than 5th in 22, because I sure would have liked to have had Cooley.
Yeah.
Logan Cooley, because boy, would he solve a lot of problems. That is such a nice player. Anyway, but
they're good. I think they're going to be a fun team, man. In a year or two, they're going to be.
Bill Armstrong's ready to spend money now.
Yeah,
so especially now with the cap, they're going to go crazy.
Yeah,
and they're not in that sinkhole in Arizona. So watch Utah going forward. Anyway, Thursday they're back home against the Capitals, real tough game, and then they close out their schedule before the break against the Penguins, who are starting to sell. And then the Flyers are off from the 8th when they play that aforementioned game against the Penguins until the 22nd when they're at home versus the Oilers, the Stanley Cup finalists from last year, who still have hopes to win a Stanley Cup. So the Flyers really have 2 weeks off. And in that time, we'll come back to you with at least one show. I don't know if there's a trade freeze. Dan, do you know if there's anything like that? There is.
You can during Four Nations. I do believe you can't trade anybody. I forget.
Okay.
Hold on. I'll try to look it up.
But yeah, because that would make sense, because that's why the urgency between then and because the Flyers have what is it? When they come back, 1, 2, 3. Yeah, the Flyers have only 6 games between when they come back against Edmonton, when the tournament's over, and March the 7th, which is Friday, the trade deadline. And that would be what Gary Lawless referred to as the second tranche of this TDL. So I think that's it. Gentlemen, why don't we get your final thoughts for tonight? I'll start with you, Dan.
No, I kind of come back to what I mentioned in the beginning, which was that I think that things have gotten stale around here. And I think that with the organization and then with shows, because there's only so much you can talk about, but I think this really gives us a path to talk about some additional things. I also thought Kevin was great. I thought that was a really good segment with him, and I'm excited that we'll be able to share that with everyone. So, those are my thoughts. Looking forward to being home for a few months straight now. I'm going to the Edmonton game with my mom. And the Flyers town hall is the night before that with Jonesy and Briere and Hilferty. So I'm going to try and go to that and then be at the Edmonton game the next day. So that's what I'm looking at, and I'm excited for it. Fans can find me on Twitter, DSolar88. I think Blue Sky is maybe the same thing, although I've got to get over there more. I'm just so ingrained to being on X, but eventually we'll do more and more on Blue Sky.
Okay, Chef.
Yeah, I love Kevin as well. Kevin was great. I started following him years ago when he was writing for the Shark, on the Shark beat, because I'd always, when we were a little kid, NHL 93 came out on Sega. That was the game when I was a kid, and the Sharks were on there, and it was so cool and we had just had a first expansion team, for my age group, So, and I thought the Sharks had the best logo, and it was all different. So Kevin's great. I've been reading his stuff for years, so it's always a pleasure to have him on. And I agree with a lot. He's a breath of fresh air, because he come in here and he's great because he says what's on his mind, and whether or not he's right or wrong, the good thing about it is it's a new take. We haven't had a take from somebody that's been out of town for 10 years, and now he's back 10, 15 years. It's always good to hear what people who were looking at this team on the outside are thinking. And it's so much better to have him back here now. I really appreciate it. And look, yeah, Dan's right too. There's actually stuff to talk about. It's not the same. Yeah, it might be the same old boring hockey, but now you have pieces on the board. Pieces were taken away. There's other things you can move now. So this is going to be great to talk about for the next until I guess the draft. So it's great. So if you want to talk to us about it, you can get to me on Chef the Left B on X, Chef the Left B on X.
You got it. You can follow the O&B Puckcast at O&B Puck at O&B Puck. Also on Blue Sky, it's at OMBpuck.bsky.social. I messed that up last week, but you got me this time. And we're also on Getter at O&B Puckcast at O&B Puckcast. And you can follow the O&B Puckcast on several podcast platforms, including Apple, Spotify, iHeart, TuneIn, and Amazon Audible. And of course, we're on YouTube and Facebook. Just type O&B Puckcast in and it'll pop right up for you. If you can follow or subscribe, whatever applies to your platform, we really do appreciate it. It'll help move us up the charts when people are looking for Philadelphia Flyers podcast. We appreciate that. And of course, your support so very much. So that's all we have for you tonight. Until next time, everybody, thanks for listening. And as always, take care.